Yeah, with just three of you, we can be real casual, but I'll probably go through the presentation formally just for the government channel so that we have, but I'll make it quick. And there's copies of it up on the ledge there if you want. In fact, we have sets of plans too if you want, 11 by 17. You take a look at the whole thing. We cut out some of the detail sheets because we didn't figure you were really going to be too interested in the concrete structural details of the trash rack and the pump station. So
start whenever you want.
we'll give it another minute or two. Just
let you know your mics are on.
Okay. Yep, I can hear it. Hi, Mayor Clark. And Mayor Miller's going to record this for the government channel so we can run it later. So yeah. Well, you can hear the PowerPoint if you want. I'll probably send it to council after tonight too, just so everyone can see it. Yeah, that's what I thought. We'll just cut it to a PDF. So
Let's get ready for the next meeting.
yeah. So Millward, you're back in the booth? So are you going to record the entire meeting or just the presentation part?
I'm planning on doing the whole thing.
That's fine. We've only got 3 citizens here, so we might go a little more casual with it. That's why I didn't know if maybe we'd adjourn the meeting part and then if there's specific questions rather than have that all recorded that are just dealing with individual homes.
Yeah, that'll be fine.
So maybe what I'll do, Millward, is then I'll just tell you that I'll say, well, we'll conclude the public meeting and then we'll open it up to questions, and that'll be your cue, okay?
Sounds good.
All right, I'm ready when you are then.
Good start.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Patrick Lewis. I'm the Director of Engineering and Public Services for the City of Monroe. On my left here is Chris Schaefer. He's our Assistant City Engineer, and he will be the project manager on this job. To my right is Barry Leroy, Director of Water and Wastewater Utilities. They'll be assisting with a couple sections of this presentation. So this is the St. Mary's Garden Storm Sewer Project Public Informational Meeting. We scheduled 2 of these. One was on December 1st in the daytime, and then this one this evening on December 8th for 5 o'clock, maybe catch some people that weren't able to get here because of work. So we've got a brief PowerPoint presentation. Up to my left and right, we've got a couple of the 24 by 36 boards, which give you some examples. One's the pump station layout. Another one is the listing of the subdivision. This one here will show you the different, the project area, and then a sample kind of the plan and profile view so we can explain a little bit about what's going on here with the project. But those of you in the audience, residents, I know you'll probably want some information about your individual homes, your individual locations, and so we do have plan sets. And after we conclude the public presentation part of the meeting, and any general questions that you all may have, we can kind of go the next step and go over any individual questions you might have related to your property. So I'm going to start the presentation here, and we'll just go through these slides here. So a little bit of background on the project. We're calling this the St. Mary's Gardens. That's the St. Mary's Gardens subdivision. This is a portion of that, and that's your subdivision plat. So that's been kind of the common name we've used on this. So that's what we're going to call the project moving forward. As I'm sure you know, as living in these homes, your subdivision was built in the 1960s. And the area we're focusing on for this particular intensive storm sewer project is the area from Hendricks Drive north to Mason Run. And that's the area, it drains to Mason Run drain, but in a unique topographic feature, the land sort of falls away from the ditch, but the storm sewers drain into it. So water kind of has to run to the south and then run back to the north depending on where you are. So that's part of the problem, and I'll show you some examples of that. As all of you know, this area has experienced frequent flooding. The most recent of those was July of 2021. The big whopper that we kind of got started on this project, and I know it's been a long, slow grind here because we've had to do so much study, so much modeling, and secure the funding for this project, was the infamous September 11th, 2014, where we had something along the lines of 5.5 inches of rain in a very short period of time, and that was a very acute problem in this area. So those of you that have lived in your home since then, I'm sure remember that. The issues with this project, of course, among many challenges we have, the storm sewer lines are undersized. In most cases, they're too flat, too shallow, and a couple of the streets there don't exist at all. John L., McCormick don't really have storm sewers. All they have is enough to drain the street, but there's no connections for homeowners to pipe their clear water discharge pipes into it. And that's part of the problem, is that a lot of those homes, if they have them at all, they either have sump pumps going into the sanitary sewer, which is against code, or they have dry wells, French drains in the front or backyards, which kind of contribute to the problem. When you have rainwater, it fills those up, everybody's just kind of pumping in a circle. So either you're pumping in a circle back to the sanitary sewer, which then causes those of you that have floor drains in your basements to back up because all that rainwater is getting in and the sanitaries can't handle it, or the groundwater is just high enough that it's continuing to put pressure on your foundation. So that's the project background and why we're here. Some existing conditions, and I've shown you a couple of photographs in there which need a little bit of explanation, but I mentioned that the lay of the land goes to the south, whereas this subdivision is supposed to drain by the storm sewers into Mason Run. And the issue that's created is they're very shallow, and in fact, it was almost like it was an afterthought when the homes were built. The last run of storm sewer actually has 1 foot of backfall going back uphill. So what you're seeing in these photographs here is the inside of Mason Run drain. We actually crawled up the drain and took a picture. That top one is just a notch out, and that's where Rosler and Lavender both look similar to this, kind of come into the drain. And you'll see there's muck that's about a foot of that muck, and that's because you've got backflow in those lines. And so the storm lines are already undersized, but then when they flow uphill and have mud standing in them, it blocks flow even more. So it creates this, I don't want to say a death spiral, but to some degree that's what it is, where it just can't overcome and push that mud out, and so you end up diminishing the capacity of those lines. I mentioned before, some roadways lack storm sewer entirely. Another thing we'll mention, although this project won't directly address it, but that's rear yard drainage. A lot of the homes have rear yard drainage issues. Back to the problem of, if there's nowhere for that water to go, how do you solve those? And when you have streets that don't have storm lines, John L. McCormick in particular, or easy access to those, how do you fix that? We believe about 75 to 80% of the homes are suspected to have clear water discharges to sanitary sewers. Now, when I talk about clear water discharge, those are things like roof drains, perimeter tiles around the perimeter, and sump pumps. And there's some homes that have none of those. There's some homes that have all of those. The most common ones are the perimeter tiles and sump pumps. So those, as I mentioned, can cause sanitary surcharges during those heavy events, and that creates that circular system where you think you're pumping it away from your basement and it just keeps coming back up the floor drain. And the other problem we have is, this was the vintage where we have a lot of tri-level homes, so of course, instead of this just being a basement problem for a lot of people, in some cases it's an actual bona fide living space problem. So we've almost got the perfect storm, so to speak, in this area. So we know this has been a big issue and a long time coming. So what are we planning to do? Well, we've engaged the Spicer Group because of Dundee, and that's been our consulting firm, and they are, I'll say, sort of the premier firm around here that does stormwater hydraulic modeling. The Drain Commissioner Office uses them a lot for their county drain projects, so we worked with them. But we've had Mr. Leroy has helped immensely with this project, as has our DPS staff. Our public services staff has worked on what we want to see here, crafting a project that we think will do the best job we possibly can. So we're going to be holistically looking at this whole site. We're going to be upgrading the storm sewers, upgrading their size, upgrading their flow characteristics, adding branch lines, deepening the whole system for proper flows and maintenance efficiency. Right now, the drain is about 6 feet roughly deep from the surrounding lay of the land. I mean, you can stand in there. There's maybe areas where it's 7, but south end of McCormick, near where it connects with Lavender, is like 3.5 feet above the flow line of Mason Run drain. So that tells you right there, how do you get water to flow properly from that area? So what that's leading us to is it's requiring a pump station. To deepen this properly, we need to basically lower everything, which is now going to put the eventual outlet below the drain. So that necessitates a pump station. With the kind of flows we're talking about, that pump station, which I've got, that's drawing over here, and you can look at that a little more after the meeting. We actually have 4 pumps that are going to be running out of that station. We need 3. Typically, you'll put a 4th one in there so you can run with 1 pump out of service to handle the 10-year, the modified 10-year. I say modified 10-year. There's kind of a historic 10-year standard, but we've had a lot of large events lately, so that has been adjusted upward. So it's kind of more like the old 25-year standard. What that means is it's not every 10 years you'll get a storm this size. It's a 10% chance in any given year you'll have a storm that exceeds that. Now, when we say that, that doesn't mean you're going to be flooded like you were before if you have something slightly above a 10-year storm. It just means that this system will take care of the 10-year storm event without any issues. We're going to put a backup generator in there as well, because as you probably have noticed, this area can be prone to some power outages. Seem to be a lot more areas in Monroe than there should be that have power outages on lesser storms. So we built that in there. There's a natural gas generator if you have the power go out in a large rain event. Even above that, we also have the middle line in there is a gravity overflow. So if everything doesn't work, it'll still flow out roughly to the same elevation it does now, except it will have the proper flow, not backflow into Mason Run. The other thing we're doing is we're providing residential taps and yard basins to every single lot in this area for future plumbing connections. So you will, instead of having to cross the street with a storm line to connect, maybe it's on the other side of the road and you've got to dig through the roadway. Nope. You're going to have it up in your yard or in the sidewalk. There's a few places we had to locate them in the sidewalk just due to locations of trees and driveways and things like that. But for the most part, they're either right behind the sidewalk or they're in the sidewalk, which means you have ready connection to those, and that's both sides of the road. We want to make it as easy as possible for you to connect any plumbing fixtures you have either now or in the future. And we'll talk about that program in a little bit. The other thing, which I'm sure you all know, is almost all the roadways in this area are complete garbage. They've needed to be reconstructed for a few years, but we've held out because we are locating many of the trunk line storm sewers in the roadway itself. That's just because of the size and because we don't want to cut every tree down on one side of the road. So putting them in the road makes sense in this case. So what we'll be doing after we're all said and done is reconstructing everything in there, with the exception of Hendricks itself. We're not going to be touching Hendricks, but Lavender, Rousler, McCormick, John L., Calgary, everything north of Hendricks to the city line at Mason Run Drain will be brand new 8-inch concrete road on 8-inch stone base. So we're going to be spending some money out here, and I'll get into that in a minute here. So I mentioned, and these are drawings we have in detail in a bigger board you can look at. This just kind of shows you what we're looking at. This is a plan view. It's got an aerial photo on there, and those of you that are used to reading construction plans will probably can understand this. I know the detail isn't it's too small to see on the screen, but that's why we have a couple of these boards up here that you can look at after the meeting. So the largest, to give you some examples, the largest two storm sewers we have in this neighborhood right now are 24-inch diameters that outlet to Mason Run Drain at Lavender and Rousler. The primary outlet is now going to go down Calgary to Calgary Park, where the pump station will be located. That's a 42-inch diameter pipe. So we're getting some pretty big lines in here. Nothing's getting smaller. It's all getting either bigger or the same size. But the primary route, McCormick, will be a main line. And then we're kind of going to intercept the existing lines in a couple of cases. The Lavender Street main line won't necessarily be replaced because that's adequately sized, but we're going to intercept it and move it over to route along Calgary to the pump station. So I think the depth at the pump station is approaching 20 feet of that 42-inch line. So that's opposed to the 6 or 7 feet that those storm sewers are now. We're closer to 20. So this is the pump station design. I kind of talked about that a few minutes ago. And you can see there's kind of two larger circular chambers in there. Those are each a big wet well. I can't remember the diameter. I want to say it's 14 feet diameter and by 20 feet in depth. And each one of those will have two pumps in them. And they'll join together in a splitter chamber. So it'll balance the flows. And essentially, we're going to be running all four pumps more or less uniformly so we don't wear one of them out. And then there's a big trash rack ahead of that. So if for some reason somebody gets a tree branch in there, I don't know how, but tree branch or log or something, it'll skim that out and pull those aside. It will be almost entirely below grade. And when I say below grade, it might stick up this far above the ground now. The concrete slabs may be a little bit elevated, but we deliberately wanted to stay away from having a giant structure that you had to look at and see there. So it's all below grade. The pumps are below grade. You'll see the natural gas generator. That's got to be above ground, but that won't be 3 or 4 feet high. You're not talking about something that's going to be big and obnoxious. So we did that deliberately, but that will occupy roughly half of the footprint of Calgary Park now. So there'll still be some vacant property to the west of there, and we've located this far enough from the home immediately to the east so that we're not, within 20 or 30 feet of that home. So we tried to take those things into account the best we could. Roadway design, and you really can't see this, but I put it up there anyway. As I mentioned, we're going to be fully reconstructing, replacing all curbs, all drive approaches, the roadway itself with 8-inch concrete with integral curbs, so that'll all be part of the roadway surface. And the main lines are, as you can see in the bottom one, kind of below the roadway. There's kind of, if you can look on the bottom of the 2 cross sections there's 2 circular pipes off to the edges. Those are those header tiles that are going to go up into the properties. So those will be there to serve your properties. And those are generally 8 to 12-inch diameter because they're only serving 3 or 4 homes. So that's what our roadway design will look like. So some of the things we wanted to stress, there's what this project will do, and then there's some things this project won't do. And we just want to be upfront and honest about the things that it won't do. But we think that what it will do will meet the vast majority of the needs and at least allow for solving the remaining issues. What it will do is construct an adequate storm sewer system for our current 10-year standards, which is adjusted for some of the more recent larger events. Provide a pump station and backup generator with gravity overflow. And it will give each home convenient access to the new storm sewer in their front yard on the house side of the sidewalk for future connections. And when I say the house side, either under the sidewalk or just on the back side of the sidewalk. And we're talking about little 2-foot diameter basins. We're not going to give you a giant cavern in your yard or anything. It'll be a 2-foot nyloplast plastic, fairly shallow structure, which will have a metal lid on. So.
We'll have a lead tapped into those as well for each.
Yes.
So you have a lead up in your front yard.
Yes.
You'll locate those with the project.
Yeah, as Mr. Leroy indicated, we've got, each one of those has a contract price of 15 feet per lead. We're going to extend it to wherever you tell us. In other words, if we're out there installing this and we say, hey, homeowner, here's what we're doing. For those of you that are here, you'll know what we're doing. Here's the yard basin. It can go here, or we can put it 20 feet that way, or we put it 20 feet that way. Those yard basins have a lot of room to move, and just because they're shown on the plans in one place, we did our best to locate them close to lot lines so that 2 lots could share one basin. But that's not to say that we're against adding 3 or 4 if we need to. We've already had one homeowner that said, that's not going to work for me. We'll probably end up adding a basin in there. But they're the smaller, shallow ones. We want to work with you to get these in decent locations for you. So where they're shown isn't necessarily set in stone. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to reconstruct the entire roadway, curbs, drive approaches, everything. So when we leave here, you're going to have a brand new roadway and everything. What this project will not do in and of itself, but we'll talk about the process for doing this, is reroute or redirect your internal plumbing. So right now, if inside your house you have a sump pump that routes to the sanitary sewer, this contract is not going to correct that. Same thing if you have perimeter tile. If that's going into a sump pump and then into the sanitary sewer, that's not going to correct it itself. But what we've done here is provide the means and mechanism for you to fix that. And there's a program that the wastewater department has that will allow you to do that. But that will involve another step on each homeowner's part to do once we get the infrastructure in to support that. I always have to say this. These next couple of things are caveats. It won't repair or replace any existing defects in your sanitary leads. So if you've got a clog in your sanitary lead from your bathroom line, if you've got tree roots in your lines, we're not necessarily going to know that as part of this project. So if you have a sewer backup unrelated to this, it's not necessarily going to fix that. But if we know about clear water that's going into that, we're going to try to separate that out. The sanitary sewer itself, though, is still the homeowner responsibility. And as I mentioned, it won't completely eliminate any backup possibilities without additional assistance. That's where you come in, is separating those clear water fixtures and providing backwater valves within your internal plumbing. Because otherwise, if nobody avails themselves of these new storm sewers and everybody just stays where they are, clear water is going into sanitary, it's going to continue to do that circular problem that we talked about. So we do need the residents' help to fix your internal problems, your internal plumbing issues with our new system. And lastly, it won't address directly any rear yard flooding issues, because that was both a significant additional expense if we were to upsize and properly size the rear yard lines themselves to collect any rainwater that gets there, and significant disruption to those backyards. Because a lot of you have fences, have pools, have sheds, have landscaping. We have an easement through behind most of these homes that we could go and do that, but you're talking about probably a couple million more. What this project will do, though, is because you've got that convenient access, I mentioned those yard basins. Even if those yard basins are only 3 or 4 feet deep, it's relatively straightforward for you to run something as simple as a 6-inch corrugated tile with a sock on it to your backyard and put a little yard drain in, and that'll allow the water to get out to the front. But again, that's beyond the scope of this project. And you'll see why when I get to the cost structure on here. This is why this project has taken a while to get off the ground. So the next slide here talks about cost, and this is not intended to do anything other than to be transparent about the cost of the project and where it's coming from. Total project cost, $7.7 million. That represents a very large commitment by your city council to fixing this issue the best we can. The pump station itself is $1.6 million alone, and that doesn't include the energy cost, the electric cost to run it, but that's the construction. The storm sewer mains themselves, and we're putting in over a mile of storm sewer, of mainline storm sewer, is about $2 million, and that includes the header tiles, that includes the yard basins and everything for that individual system. Roadways themselves are $2.8 million, which is, that's nothing out of the ordinary for the mileage we've got. Again, we're well over a mile of street. We put on there about $200,000 in construction contingencies, and that's normal. That's in case something goes wrong. We have to protect that and make sure we have that funded. And the next number may seem a little high. It's $1 million in engineering. Some of that's already spent, but I mentioned the extensive modeling we had to do. We had to know where these lines need to be located. We needed to know where water was likely to back up to. So we spent about $350,000 in design, and that's the Spicer Group doing multiple iterations of this project. We have about $650,000 on construction, which again seems like a large number, but we also had this bid with the number of days the contractor felt they needed. You're looking at over 200 days of construction, closer to 250. That's what they bid and assumed. And there's actually an offset in there where the contractor, if he exceeds that number of days, they have to pay the project back because we'll have extra inspection costs. So the nice part is we shouldn't have to worry about those inspection costs running over. But we've got, and that's a significant number because we have technical experts that have to review the submittals, the shop drawings for the pump station, a lot of those large items, because this is a very extensive job. And then we threw about another $100,000 on there for miscellaneous expenses. Some of that is our city engineering time. Some of it is permits that we have to get, and we've already obtained. So that's where you get your $7.7 million. Where are we funding it? Where's the city coming up with this money? Well, fortunately, and we're using some of our ARPA money, that's the American Recovery Plan Act, that was coronavirus dollars from the federal government, and this was an eligible expense. So the bad news is that because we're bidding it now instead of 2 years ago, inflation has taken a bit of a hit on this, has caused the cost to go up, but the good news is that is more than covered by the additional federal funds we're allocating to this. So the city has taken well over a third of its entire ARPA allocation and put it into this project. So the city council clearly sees this as an important project. We are tapping the wastewater fund for a little short of $1 million, and that's because we mentioned, and Barry will talk about this in a moment, I'll turn it over to him to discuss the corrective action plan. That's because we're operating under that corrective action plan, and wastewater, there is a need to remove that clear water from the wastewater system. And we did transfer about $500,000 from our street millage because we're spending $2.8 million in street project money. Fortunately, we're still able to do some other streets this year besides just this neighborhood. And then the city has other general fund and capital projects fund sources that we've been saving up over the years in anticipation of this. That's another $2.3 million. Stat there, which I just ran the numbers to run the numbers. This project represents over $50,000 per property commitment to correcting as much as possible these residual storm issues. And so, again, I want to applaud City Council for their foresight and for their willingness to attack this because we've known it's been a big issue. But in case you're wondering why it's taken us 8 years to get here from that 5-inch rain event, part of that's why. It's the sheer cost of this and making sure we get it as right as we can. So I mentioned at the bottom of the last slide, some commitment from property owners may be needed to correcting internal plumbing issues. We're not sure that that'll actually have to be the case because our program that Barry's going to roll out for you here in a moment is more or less 100% reimbursement on that. You may have some ancillary things here and there that may come up as you have to redirect your plumbing. And if you want to fix your rear yard drainage issues, that may involve some financial commitment from you to do that. But by and large, this project, we wanted to do it without a special assessment district because we recognize the deficiencies were there from original construction. So I just wanted to make that point. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Barry Leroy here, our utility director, and he'll step you through the corrective action plan because he has a few things he'll want to elaborate on. So, Barry?
All right. How y'all doing? Okay, so what's a corrective action plan? That is a designated plan over a time frame to address issues. The Department of Eagle with the state, we have a discharge permit at the wastewater plant that outlines all of our requirements for discharging water into the lake after we clarify it. This corrective action plan is in that latest permit, and we're currently operating under that. And what we have in there is it's about a 10 to 12 year program to remove clear water in different parts of the system. And as Patrick pointed out, this St. Mary's Garden subdivision area is actually one of them. There's a variety of different areas throughout the system for us to remove, and this is the current phase we're actually in. We're actually getting ready to line some sewers out there in the Mason Run drain there. So, but this program is also part of it, and we've had a footing drain disconnection program since 2015, and it's been a 50-50, more or less, reimbursement to the homeowner for removing clear water, and that includes like offsetting costs for a sump pump being put in and getting the footing drains removed out of the sanitary, and as well as putting in a backwater valve as an option. As I mentioned, we've been lining sewers. We've been doing some enforcement with, as Patrick pointed out, we know we did inspections a couple years ago with our consultant, Fishbeck. I'm not sure if you guys remember that consultant, but they've sent several notices out, as well as the city, for trying to gain access to document like what infrastructure is at the home so we can kind of plan for costs. So this has been, as Patrick pointed out, it's an 8-year project. It took a few years to garner all this data. And the goal here is to, after the infrastructure is in place to help outlet the clear water, then we would come in with separate contractors, or you can use your own contractor, and we can reimburse up to a certain amount for removing the clear water from the system. And I'll talk about that form here in a little bit. Let's see here. As I mentioned, 2015 is when we started this footing drain disconnection program, but we lacked the storm sewer outlet for this area, so that this project is kind of a hand-in-hand partnership that we're working with the city on this as a wastewater department. But again, it's commitment on the homeowner to be take the next step. And with that, this is kind of a graphic of what a home typically may have there now. The exterior perimeter tile, just because of the age of the homes, they are typically tied into the sanitary. It was allowed in the plumbing code before that change occurred in the early 1970s. And if everybody's footing tiles tied into there, and based on the topography out there and the depth of the sewers and the lack of storm sewers, they would overload the sanitary sewer system. On top of that, if some pumps are tied in there, all that hydraulic energy goes in there, and that's what ultimately can back up homes and overwhelm the system out there. So the next step that would be needed after the infrastructure is in place is to move into a footing drain disconnection program. Essentially, having the footing tiles tied into a sump pump that could be either on the inside or outside, depending on your situation, and then outletting that to the infrastructure that's put in with this project. So that would be a big step. And then another item that's on that program is to put in a backwater valve that can go also inside or outside, and that would essentially prevent some additional protection from sewer backup. So if the sewer system does get overloaded, that backwater valve would close and mitigate you getting backed up. And then if your sump pump is tight, got all your footing drains tied in, you'd be protected that way from clear water for a time frame. So I'm going to stop there. So Did you want to talk about this right now, Pat, the forms? So do we have a couple extra copies there?
We have plenty of extra copies up on there. I think anyone who would like one, we can pass one out those days.
So this is a form we put together, and it's essentially a 100% either reimbursement or we could have a city contractor do it. We just need to gain access to your home, evaluate it, and verify things from the inspections. And we would then, as the tail end of the project is finishing up, we would engage different contractors to either do a large project or one-on-one type project to put in your sump pump. And then if you wanted the backwater valve, we could put that in too. And then we would turn that infrastructure over to you to handle as a homeowner going forward. So, and the whole goal here is to provide you the protection, get the clear water out. That's what the benefit with the system here. It's in our permit. We will be funding that through our annual rate structure, as well as Patrick. We pointed out the contribution. That's more of a capital fund investment, but the goal here is to do a comprehensive program that's tied in with their overall program. So, and with that, I'll turn it over to Pat.
The next steps. All right.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yep.
All right, so here's where we lay out what we know about the construction schedule, where we're going, where we think we're going, with the understanding that Old Man Winter is approaching here, and so there's a little bit of uncertainty. You've probably already seen we're storing materials, we're bringing equipment in over at Calgary Park, and that's where they're using primarily for a staging area. Lead times are always a potential, unknown here, because actually the funny thing is the longest lead time is actually the pump station, which normally would be the downstream end of this. A lot of the pump station equipment, pumps and the electrical equipment themselves, has the longest lead time. However, the contractor will basically, once they sever any connections to the existing storm system, will be pumping from that location into Mason Run Drain. So they've committed to doing that. We told them, if you're going to start, you need to make accommodations to pump that stormwater out of there, and so they'll be setting up some type of pump structure. However, for the first few weeks, they'll be putting in new line that shouldn't affect the existing system. They're going to be starting at the pump station location where the wet well will be, and start running that large diameter 42-inch pipe. They'll head on to Calgary and then start heading east with that. They usually lay the pipe from downstream to upstream. And they are likely to start doing that. They originally said sometime after Christmas. It might be into January before they start that. Frost should not be an issue with the type of size equipment they need to put these large storm sewers in, so I don't think they're anticipating worrying about where the frost line is. However, if we get an exceptional amount of snow, I can see them pulling off the contract for a few weeks at a time. So we don't know for sure. However, given as long of a project as this is likely to be, we don't want to discourage them from starting this winter if they can do so effectively. So for the initial phases, when they're laying those mainline storm sewers, they'll be tearing up half of the road and then probably just putting it back in some type of stone or cold patch, depending on how big the trench is. And but you should have access to your driveways. It'll just be when they're actually installing past your driveway, half a day, and you'll know when they're getting close. I mean, it'll be pretty easy to see where they are and where they're going. And please feel free at any time to contact the engineering department. We can give you up-to-the-minute details. Chris Schaefer will be our primary contact. He's got cards here. And we've essentially assigned him to just handle resident interface and be kind of an overseer of the project, whereas we have an inspector from Spicer that will be watching the work, because we want to be able to focus on that, on giving the residents the service that you need on a project like this. So I guess don't worry for the winter work. It may be slow, it may be tedious, it won't impact much of what your existing house system or any of that should be affected by that early on. We'll probably, assuming we have a decent winter like we normally do where they can get some construction done, we'll probably start working on those branch lines sometime in the spring. Hopefully by then we'll also have the wet wells in so that we can start installing those. The wet wells may be in a couple of months. So that's, when I say wet wells, that's the pump station. Those are the big chambers. Those wet wells themselves will store a heck of a lot of storm water. So even if we were only running one pump from those, the water will get to those wet wells and we'll pump from those. And the pump station construction will be whenever we get the materials in. So hopefully it's sooner rather than later, but we don't know yet. They're not in and we don't have a delivery date. We believe, based on the contractor schedule, their completion date on this is September 30th of 23. We believe they're going to try to beat that as long as everything's in, and there's no reason they can't. But probably the street construction work probably won't begin in earnest until May or June, in all likelihood. So, and that's where you will have some restrictions on driveway access. We are not going to tear out every single street in the neighborhood simultaneously and then pave them. So that may be your next question. But it will be somewhat inconvenient because obviously if we're doing 5 streets at a time, we've got some staging. But some of them will be one way going one direction, but there will always be a path through the neighborhood from the north and south. So whether that's Lavender or Rosler, it's going to be one or the other. So we'll kind of do half and half. John L. and Rosler will go together. McCormick and Lavender will go together. Calgary will get pieced in with wherever it's appropriate. So, and as I mentioned, we need your help in identifying what clear water fixtures you have so that we can reconnect them. To the residents, some of you may already have the plumbing set up properly. We did have one gentleman at the earlier meeting that already has a backwater valve and he has a sump pump. It routes to a catch basin in the road. So he's one of the lucky ones that actually has a place to go. So in his case, he doesn't need to do anything else, but we're going to need to move where the yard basin is so we can intercept where his sump line comes out. So if you know where you have existing plumbing fixtures that might be clear water, and they come out to the roadway area, we'll connect those. So the intention is not to just say, okay, well, you're on your own, get a contractor. You know, if we know there's a downspout run that goes below ground, and we can see that and it's 20 feet that way, we'll route that into that yard basin. Because we want to connect as much of this as possible that we know of. But in any project, there's going to be some residents that we can't get a hold of, or they work weird hours and we can't directly interface with them. So the idea is Chris will be available as much as possible. He won't be on the job site all day, every day, because he has other responsibilities here. But generally speaking, I think one of us will be on the job site every day, along with that inspector from Spicer Group. So, any questions? We're going to have, and again, Chris's contact information is there. He has some business cards. I think what I'd like to do, because we are going to be broadcasting this for later presentation to others, I'd like to see if there's any general questions on the project itself, and then we can kind of adjourn the public portion of the meeting, and we can talk about any individual concerns you might have on your properties or anything like that. Are there any general concerns